Hi, and welcome to our YouTube channel. Today we're going to be talking about fentanyl and just how it's the most dangerous opioid and it's responsible for almost all the opioid deaths in America right now. It's so dangerous that we've got to get the word out. If you're new to this channel, I'm Dr. Peter Coleman, and on this channel you will find new videos every week that are providing evidence-based medical research combined with practical experience treating patients over 35 years, helping them get into recovery and stay in long-term recovery. If you like this channel and find it useful, please subscribe and tell your friends and family. So fentanyl, what is it and why is it so dangerous and what can we do about it? Well, fentanyl, of course, is an opioid. It means that it's based on the products from the poppies, although it's purely synthetic. And so it goes to the endorphin receptors in the brain. As you probably know, we all have endorphin receptors which are in our brain in order to give us pain relief and energy. So the natural molecule is called endorphin, which is morphine from within. And so fentanyl comes to that receptor and turns it on way stronger than it was ever meant to get. That means that when that receptor is turned on, it goes to the brain and gives people a dopamine rush in their reward system, so they get a very strong euphoria along with side effects and other effects. One of the biggest effects that opioids do is they slow down respirations, and at even medium or high doses, they stop breathing altogether. That's why fentanyl, when it was first introduced, it was a pharmaceutical, and it was really only used in one situation, and that was to put people to sleep. But it was only used in the anesthesia operating room because it was so dangerous that it would put people to sleep so quickly and so strongly that it would stop them breathing, and the anesthesiologist, of course, was right there to put a tube down and intubate them and breathe for them. But used anywhere outside of that setting, it was just known to be incredibly dangerous and really should never be used. It did start being released as a patch, also for chronic pain relief, where people could put a low dose on their skin. And so that was relatively safe because it was just a slow release formulation. Although even patients died with that if the patch burst, and there were a couple of fatalities where the patch failed and a lot of the fentanyl that was sitting in there got into the system too quickly. But an example of how dangerous fentanyl is, even when it's used in medical situations, is that I've worked with a lot of addicted physicians over the years, and anesthesiologists particularly were vulnerable to addiction. They were also vulnerable to overdoses. There were many cases where an anesthesiologist with known quantities of fentanyl would take it because they had an addiction problem and would overdose and die and be found dead in the hospital. So it's a very, very dangerous drug, and it turns out that it's 50 times stronger than heroin. We all knew that heroin was bad because we've seen fatal overdoses from heroin ever since it was invented, and particularly in the 60s after the Vietnam War, we saw a lot of fatal overdoses, and that's why methadone was developed as a treatment program that helped that. But in the 90s, when heroin started coming back and very pure forms of heroin, we started seeing huge numbers of overdoses. Well, fentanyl is 50 times stronger. And what is stronger about it is not just that it's measured in micrograms rather than milligrams. So the fatal dose of fentanyl is probably in the order of about 2 milligrams of fentanyl. But the doses that we use in medicine are measured in the micrograms. So to give you an idea of how small a fatal dose of fentanyl is, and some people say it's about the size of a grain of rice, is if you think of a baby aspirin, which is 81 milligrams, fentanyl overdose 2 milligrams. So it's 1/40th the size of a baby aspirin. That's how potent it is. It tends to get into the brain and makes the dopamine go up really fast. And so unfortunately, patients get a stronger euphoria for it, and it becomes very attractive to the patients. And of course, part of the addiction process is that when the patient gets a dopamine rush in their reward system, it sends messages to their thinking part of the brain that really distorts the way people think. And one of the problems with that is that everybody thinks they're not going to be the one that has an overdose. They're going to be able to control it. And unfortunately, it's just not true. So fentanyl is incredibly dangerous. A couple of the other things that make it dangerous is that it has this low therapeutic index, which means that the dose between that it works and the dose that kills you is very, very narrow. So it's hard to measure. Because it's 2 milligrams, that's the fatal dose, and it's such a small amount of powder, the way the drug comes, and it's smuggled in from the country, is as a powder, and then it's mixed up, and a lot of street dealers and people are actually mixing it up in kitchen blenders. And so you can picture just how absolutely inaccurate that can be. If you take a kilogram of white powder and then you mix in this small amount of fentanyl and you try to mix it all together, that when you then separate that out, one part of that mixture is going to have a lot more fentanyl than another. So literally, when people buy stuff on the street, they have no idea what they're getting. They might be getting a strong dose, they might be getting a very weak dose. And unfortunately, the difference between a weak dose and a strong dose is often fatal. It really is playing Russian roulette every time people use it. So it's incredibly dangerous. It's a big problem too because it's so cheap and easy to make. Heroin has to be made from poppies, which means you have to grow them somewhere, you have to process them, and you have to smuggle them. Fentanyl, on the other hand, can be made in a lab with just raw materials, raw chemicals, and so it's very easy to make and very cheap to make. So it's such a dangerous drug that we need to get the word out of how dangerous it is. We need to get people into treatment as soon as possible. Please, if you know anybody who's using any street drugs, get them into treatment as soon as possible. We're starting to see fentanyl all the time in what people used to buy as heroin. In fact, about 2 or 3 years ago, we started noticing people would come in and they would tell us, oh, I'm using a gram of heroin a day. We'd measure their urine and then we'd find there's no heroin there at all. It's all fentanyl. We're also seeing it in other scary situations where people are saying, oh, I'm buying oxycodone or oxycontin or hydrocodone on the street, and it's a pressed pill, but the people making this stuff are just making it out of fentanyl now instead of the hydrocodone or oxycodone because it's so much cheaper for them. We've even heard of stories where it's laced into marijuana, and so there have been some fatalities in cases out in San Francisco and different parts where people thought they were just smoking pot, but it was laced with fentanyl. We've also seen it in Xanax and benzodiazepines, so people think they're buying a sedative, and what they're actually buying is fentanyl. It's so dangerous that there's at least 100 deaths a day, and we need to just get people into treatment as soon as possible. So we also need to get health departments to make MAT available as quickly as possible. And the good news is that the word is getting out there. There are a number of programs around the country where they're making medication-assisted treatment available 24 hours a day for anybody who wants it at any time. And I think that's one of the most important things that we can do. We need to make a treatment cheap and available anytime that the person says, you know what, I'm sick of this, I don't want to take any chances, I want to get my life back and I want to get into treatment and I don't want to play Russian roulette anymore. So I hope you've found this information helpful. If you do find this information helpful, please subscribe to our channel. You're welcome to email me at drcoleman@thecolemaninstitute.com if you have any questions or comments or subjects you'd like information on in the future. Thank you.